We all have different levels of understanding, so we'll start fairly simply, but bear in mind how some of this could be relevant to your practice. You may be underway with a project already where 3D can support, or have a previous project in mind that could be developed further using some 3D knowledge. So, 3D or not 3D, making a case for some 3D skills in your practice. This is what we'll cover, quick intro. Then there are some industry insights that were part of the session. We don't have the recordings, but I will be kind of talking through what their points of view were briefly, and then getting underway with the first skilling up task. As outlined in today's session, 3D for some is one dimension too many, but it certainly is an important skill to improve all aspects of your practice. I certainly find it has liberated my design thinking, and it is certainly a direct and effective communication tool. But there's more to it than simply that, and I'll be making a case for you to adopt some 3D in your practice, and that starts today. In my opinion, indeed, any basic 3D skill as part of your toolkit is more essential than ever. If we look back only 5 to 10 years, one of the main questions employers were asking graduates was, can you do video motion editing? There was a real demand on video content as the internet shifted from a text-based resource to predominantly streaming video, all stuff that you know and have consumed. But there's a new paradigm shift underway, and as traditionally separated industries of film, gaming, and social media converge towards transmedia, there are now multiple points of entry to discover new ideas, and new technologies have evolved with new ways to express and experience those ideas. Many employers already are and will continue to ask the new and future graduates, do you have any 3D skills? If you have no comprehension, even a basic understanding, that excludes you from the conversation, or indeed that opportunity. So first things first, relax. You already work in 3D. If you've created a zine or a poster or some packaging, you've already thought about the relationship that that item or artifact has with an individual or a particular audience. 3D is all about relationships, even in these examples. Whenever we work in print, for example, we might have a complex paper engineered flyer or flipbook. We should, and I implore you, you must always create a physical mock-up to understand the relationship of one surface to another, so that we can plan out our content, think about scale, composition, legibility, create pace, tension, or juxtapose content for impact or effect. The same is true in 3D. Making a mock-up also helps us to eliminate errors or unforeseens, experience the feel of the materials, and make the design tangible. So even when working in book design, we ask for book dummies to be able to see binding and spine width, so that we can compensate or align our design so that it looks the best it can. With experience, you'll easily spot when people have made mistakes and skipped making a mock-up because they've not considered the object, its physicality, as part of the design. I'm sure we've all been there, made a mock-up and quickly realized the design needs tweaking. Type sizes and their legibility need re-evaluating, or folds moved for a better experience when opening some packaging. So the moral of the story is we should never assume. Assuming a PDF will simply print is a grave error, even with the simplest projects. This notion of assume nothing was concisely immortalized by a friend of mine who in her studio had this slogan on her wall. Well, you can't put it more frank than that, a life lesson no less. So if simply making a mock-up can highlight the need for design thinking and prototyping in 3D, the same is true for developing the layout and narrative of an exhibition or the legibility and clarity of a wayfinding system quickly and economically. Assume nothing, test it out with all the tools available to you. Before we dive into discussing digital 3D, I want to build upon this importance of exploring what, for now, we can call analog 3D. Mock-ups or model making, i.e. making things with your hands. Or just playing with objects and their relationships can be used to communicate ideas quickly and with economy. We do it in other areas of our industry, sketching thumbnails, creating wireframes or storyboards. In architecture, they do exactly the same thing called massing. And even in the gaming industry, they block out levels to define gameplay. We all know how intimidating that first page of a sketchbook can be, that pristine white page that you don't want to muck up. Where do you start? The same is true, if not compounded more, when we're challenged to fill a space or even a plinth to occupy. Invariably, things don't go to plan straight out of the gate. As with any design problem, it can be as simple as shifting our own mindset. So rather than trying to project our ideas onto an audience, we can shift our thinking and become the audience and ask ourselves, what would we like to see? What might surprise us and keep us engaged? That simple act can actually free us up to be bolder with our ideas and experiment more freely. Again, use the audience and relationship to the idea as a design development tool. So I used to carry around some small architectural models of people. If you don't have any, you don't need them. You can just cut out and print out some people at varying scales, and then just start placing them next to objects, on top of objects, under, within, and begin to play and appreciate the impact of scale in both directions and how scale can have an impact on our experience of an idea. So let's come back to our simple and humble piece of paper, or plane as it's known in 3D jargon. And we add a single fold, pulling it into 3 dimensions. Well, that's changed everything. And when we consider our relationship with this new form, its orientation and scale, we create a shelter, or in this case, a bus stop shelter in the Austrian Alps, which graphically evokes the landscape in which it sits. So in this example, it's also about the shelter's relationship with its environment or context. So again, relationships are key in adding meaning, and context is another layer of influence on an idea. As we know, starting with a blank piece of paper, our thoughts can go in an infinite number of directions. Working spatially only compounds our potential. So the plane that we've just seen can be used in 1,000,001 ways. Some great examples here. On the left, the Coca-Cola BEATBOX Pavilion, which is an explosion of planes to create a musical instrument installation that you walk through and trigger by proximity to those planes. The paper bridge on the right-hand side by Steve Messon, again, only really achievable by making and trying, no doubt failing and iterating. So in the examples I've shown you so far, we're looking at planes and surfaces. For some designers, that's as far as 3D goes, applying surface graphics to forms defined by others, i.e. architects or engineers. Again, using our examples of an exhibition design or simple wayfinding system. But we can contribute to the development of the forms themselves, not just inheriting the milk carton from Tetra Pak, but maybe rethinking and reinventing it with better ergonomics and an improved grip, or simply a different form to stand out and be memorable. Whatever the intention is, we can define, experiment, and contribute as designers here too. Analog is sometimes just about diving in and trying, and worrying about the how-to later. These 2 projects are ace. So on the left here we have TADASHI KAWAMATA's stacks of hundreds of chairs into a 20-foot high sculpture which creates a separate room within a library. And on the right, the UCHRONIA pavilion by Arne Quince, which just uses planks of wood that he's nail gunned everything together. So both have an underlying idea, but need to be worked out in their construction, nail guns in hand. With some things you can only plan so far before other unforeseen practicalities come into play. These can be sketched out using doll's house chairs, for example, or toothpicks to convey the idea alone. So you can be resourceful at scale, whatever communicates the idea. Continuing our resourcefulness theme, sometimes it can be as simple as reappropriating something that already exists, like these polypropylene cube tanks, normally used to transport liquids, reformatted a la Minecraft to create a public space and outdoor club in Berlin. The only thing that changes is the lighting design to add variety and give the space different moods to complement its public program of events. The good news is that with only a few primitive shapes and combining their scales, orientation and density, you can pretty much create anything. Once you start modeling in 3D, a few things will begin to happen. You'll start to look at how things in the real world are constructed, and you'll decode the primitives and everything around you. It's a natural reaction, and it really improves your spatial awareness and comprehension of how things are put together, and the underlying rules that define their construction. Again, their relationships with each other, their colors and textures. And primitives can be the starting point on their own, as demonstrated here in this great project using simple rubber rings to create a playground of ideas and forms in this installation for kids to explore. We're taking the torus, which as a shape in itself is just a cylinder with its ends connected. So even primitives are made out of other primitives. So let's backwards engineer a few more projects, as that's one of the most effective ways that I find I learn. So here, simple planks are used to create a pavilion inspired by a walk through a bamboo forest, designed for the World Horticultural Festival. What I like about this is that it's quickly evident in these photographs the difference in mood or atmosphere between interior and exterior experiences. So if you create this in 3D digitally, you could very quickly simulate different lighting conditions to show what the atmosphere might be at sunrise or under a full moon, if they are part of the story you're wishing to tell. Beyond primitives, you can of course bring in and extrude your own shapes. It's only really your own imagination which limits you in how you combine all of these techniques. So you need to constantly feed your imagination and play with convention to see what surprises or impacts upon you. Here, the simple house profile is articulated in 3 very different ways at varying scales, each to great effect. So don't let scale be a limitation on your ideas. One practitioner who I think really embodies this evolution from analog to digital 3D is Devlin. She is a London-based artist and set designer, and her work is predominantly graphic-led. Her career has had a preoccupation with the cube and our relationship with it, and she's explored this in theatre sets and art installations. She's very analog in her approach and happily cuts, tears and glues paper as a way of conveying her ideas and narratives spatially. She openly admits that she's hugely dependent on younger, smarter design associates with good 3D capabilities, and of course engineers, to realize these concepts sketched in paper and card. The need for 3D skills is also a generational shift, and having some 3D skills will also help to future-proof aspects of your practice, improve your design thinking, and enable you to work with others and hold your own and be able to articulate your opinions using the right vocabulary in those conversations. So, some basic truths about digital 3D. And on the topic of vocabulary, 3D is full of jargon, so it can feel like learning a new language. So keep this resource handy and learn its vocabulary as you progress. The 80-20 rule certainly applies. Once you've got an understanding of the 3 core principles of modeling, texturing, and lighting, you can do pretty much everything you need to do. So you can achieve 80% of what you want to do with only 20% of the knowledge. Programs like Blender have evolved into really brilliant software capable of complex fluid and physics simulations, but you don't need to know any of that to get underway. Curiosity will, no doubt, get the better of you, and you will seek out and immerse yourself in all its other capabilities. But don't be intimidated by getting underway. Chip away and you'll be amazed at the progress you make and how quickly you can adopt this new skill into your practice and professional life. One of our guests that showed his adoption of Blender after doing the Blender Guru Donut tutorial, which is your task. Within 2 or 3 weeks, he was using it to do pack shots of gloss modern products and created a digital photography studio that meant that all the lighting was consistent across product shots over a long period. He's been working with that client for years. So if you're interested in any of these areas of creative practice, then you will need basic 3D to be able to join that conversation, understand the language, and hold your own with greater understanding. But longer term, it's not necessarily about you having to do the work once you have the knowledge. Personally, my approach to learning any tech as a creative director is to become proficient, maybe a bit more than proficient, but not an expert. Once you're proficient, you're able to commission the work. You can fix any issues with it when you get it back from your supplier. And, of course, you can sniff out any bullshit. Trust me, it happens. You might be looking at this list and saying, none of those are relevant to me, but gaming might be a platform adopted for activism, 3D printing to prototype a product we know, animation for in-store content in a retail space, or AR to augment a university with digital twin data layers. This is all the direction that we're going in, because we're at this moment of industry convergence and the evolution of transmedia, topics which we will go into more in the next talk. They are all relevant in communication design in any sector. Learning 3D has a whole host of other consequential benefits, 3 of the most important which I have highlighted, many that I've touched upon so far. I'm sure many of you have seen this diagram before. It represents how we need to balance our resources if we have time, money, and people to work with. When working alone, of course, the truth is it's your time that is the one that suffers the most, as you have to commit more of it to achieve your goal. Now, I know many of you might be thinking, I haven't got time to learn 3D, but you have and should, as by doing so, you will free up way more time than you are putting in the long term. Learning it is an investment with good returns. The 3 that I highlighted is that 3D is now quick, free, and empowering. So what would have taken a team of 4 or 5 people, you can now do on your own. Time is the biggest reason why all these industries are changing so dramatically at the moment, because we can now work real time, and that changes the dynamic of work and creativity. Ideally, try and commit an hour a day to get underway with the tasks over the next few weeks. Coming on to digital 3D, an empowering tool to communicate ideas effectively. I love the simplicity of this quote by Carlos Scarpa describing the architecture profession. The value of a work is let me start again. The value of a work is its expression. When something is well expressed, its value becomes high. I've hijacked it and changed its core. The value of an idea is its expression. When something is well expressed, its value becomes high. Ideas ultimately are still where value is created. If our intent is to gloss over a bad idea by throwing technology at it to distract us from the fact, then we're using this technology in the wrong way. 3D can be super high definition, but it doesn't need to be. Look at the success and engagement of platforms like Minecraft, a hive of creativity and exploration of ideas. Sometimes when you're presenting in 3D, things can be too polished and too finished, and that can alienate a client. They don't feel as if they've been involved in part of the development process. So think strategically about how far you want to adopt 3D in the process of a project. Let's start looking at some of the practitioners that are using 3D as a tool. So the PDF presentation is also going to be in the description down below, so you should be able to click on these links in your own time. But the first clip that's there is a great film charting the work of Inyo Asuna, who's a manga artist, who realized that his work was becoming a bit repetitive because he was using reference photography that were always from the same kind of point of view, perspective. So he adopted Unreal Engine start creating his own reference material, but from all angles, aerial shots, all sorts of things, adding dynamism to his manga. A great example, again, of our triangle, time, money, people. Here, this clip by The Mill is a great example of how to find a faster way to animate by using real-time motion capture and rendering. So they had created a animated TV spot for monsters.com, which took them 8 weeks. But then the agency came back to them and said, all right, we want 30, 15-second clips for social media in the next 2 weeks. And that just wasn't going to work if they used the same approach. So again, using Unreal Engine, they managed to turn around this content. But in doing so, actually realized that getting all the stakeholders in the room and being able to work real time really reignited the creative freedom and, again, the involvement of the agency and client in the process. VR, of course, can be used purely for research and problem solving. So here, for example, we have some stills from a VR wayfinding project for HS2 before any of the HS2 stations are built. So here we're looking at a sort of daytime setting, but in theory, using real-time technology and gaming technology, we can simulate all sorts of things. So, you know, whether it's at rush hour, whether it's at night, what are the lighting levels, what do we need to tweak, what happens when there's an emergency and the station's full of smoke, how are the exit signs and the kind of safety of the public, how is that all managed? And all of that can be done in VR before anything is prototyped, physically manufactured, or indeed installed, or even the building built. So you can get way ahead in terms of your design thinking and practical applications. You know, merch, whether you love it or hate it, is very big business. And here, Will Sweeney, who does a lot of work with Stussy, has now kind of gone into doing collectibles as well. And one thing that always amused me whenever I went into a gallery, for example, the sculpture gallery in the Victoria and Albert Museum, is seeing how people address sculptures. So, you know, people will kind of come up and look at them sort of and address them from one perspective, as if that was how you needed to look at the sculpture, rather than actually appreciating 360 degrees what the sculpture is telling you, because invariably there's a bit of narrative within the sculpture that might be behind the character, behind the main person, or, you know, an interaction between a faun and a Greek god, what's going on everywhere. So make sure you always look 360 degrees around a sculpture. Don't be one of those people. Right, where are we? So this is an exquisite piece of data visualization by MATHIEU Lehan, making declining population numbers across the globe a tangible affair. Here he's used 3D printed aluminium and this kind of cyclic approach to presenting it, which I think is very, very effective. And then summarizing all his data into this collective piece about Earth and its declining numbers. So a really, really beautiful piece of work. And a great example of how keeping abreast of all these technological developments and seeing how you can embody them as part of your own practice and enable you to express your ideas quickly, efficiently, economically, and in this case, very eloquently. You know, it's 3D printing technology that makes manufacturing these custom shapes so accessible, and you know, we're not sort of limited by big volumes anymore. We can do one-offs. We also hear quite often about new and emerging careers, and real-time technology is something that has started to address that. So we're just starting to see the beginning of PITCHVIZ and PREVIZ. They're two emerging disciplines which have evolved for film and event set design, as well as planning out planning out shots between a director of photography and a cinematographer, for example. And by doing all of this ahead of time, ahead of being on set, huge savings are made and everybody's on the same page. It's a kind of natural evolution of the storyboard. PREVIZ also might be before actually getting underway with a particular shot. So this is quite an interesting example on the top here, where the set design for a single shot in this film was pre-built. And they knew it was a complex set because of the lighting and all the glazing. But what they hadn't anticipated, and what the creation of a digital copy revealed, was that when they were mapping out with virtual cameras the shots that they wanted to do, they realized actually they needed to take out quite a lot of the glass panes because the number of reflections just got out of hand and would have kind of created real problems on shoot day. So here you can't quite see it, but not every panel is glazed because they've been able to work all that out ahead of time. Here in the bottom, we've just got a live event stage design and lighting system, pyrotechnics, everything that can be pre-visualized. So an artist can, a performer, can put on a VR headset, be part of the design development team and experience their show from any place in an auditorium, so they can see how their fans are experiencing the show. So really, really powerful. So yes, 3D does sci-fi very, very well, and I guess it's a bit of a legacy of game engine and the fact that so many games are about deep space exploration, that there's a particular aesthetic sometimes associated with 3D and sci-fi and 3D. So yes, maybe too obviously, it can do sci-fi. Love, Death and Robots is a great example of how look dev can have an impact on how 3D is handled. And there's been some really brilliant, unique sort of visual styles established through the development of those projects. And one of my favorites is The Tall Grass, which is in the second series, which is very kind of, 1880s, the American plains. It has a real kind of fantastic mood to it. And again, it's about creating atmosphere, not necessarily just about creating realism. So an extension of that is that 3D can be super simple, elegant and stylish. And again, here, this project really set out to change the opinions of the BLUEZOO internal team. They've been working with traditional pipelines on animation, and they decided to try and adopt Unreal Engine in this case to see how real-time technology could feel less like a game engine. That was one of their main motivations, but also how real-time changed the pipeline and the work and how they approached the work and how they could all collaborate collectively. Pipelines is something we're going to go into more in the next talk, but this is a great introduction and a great piece of work. The making of is really fantastic too. So click on the links in the PDF, which you can find below. So begs the question, which areas of your practice could 3D support? So give some thought to that. Maybe take an existing project and just think, oh, okay, I'm going to visualize that now, because you've got all the assets. You're not going to have to create a lot of work. You just need to get the skills underway. Now, the task which I got lined up for you is just an established task. It's Blender Guru and the donut tutorial. It's amazing. It's really fantastic. He's done an awesome job. So, that's something that I want to try and get you to do before the end of next week to get you well underway. And he kind of has put that together in a really efficient way. So do that. I'm going to do it again as a refresher, always good. And we will pick things up on next week's talk. Thanks a lot. Bye now.